and get going. For this is being recorded, so anyone who joins late, we're recording this, we're sending it out, and if you need to drop, we know it's the holidays, it's a busy time, we'll send the recording out afterwards. So Joel, I'm going to go ahead and kick this over to you. But actually, agenda real quick. Welcome. We're going to go do a quick 10-minute lightning talk on the cultural drain of poor on-call habits. And then we're going to jump into a roundtable discussion based on those topics. And then we'll open it up for Q&A. And today we have Joan O'Callahan. She's the Director of Monitoring and Observability at Udemy. And Alina Anderson, the Principal Technical Program Manager Outreach, joining us today for our roundtable, which will be hosted by Robert Ross, our CEO and co-founder here at Fire Hydrant. And Joel Smith, our Senior Director of Product, is going to take over here.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. Appreciate it. Today I want to talk a little bit about some of the research that our team has kind of participated in and run over the last 6 or 9 months that have led to some of the conclusions that are underpinning kind of where we're heading as a business and kind of where we see the industry today and moving forward. And you kind of sum that up of Robert wrote a post about the kind of cultural drain caused by incidents. And today we wanted to talk about the cultural drain caused by poor on-call rotation management. So let's get into it. So this past spring, we worked with an analyst group who helped us work on kind of understanding, obviously we want to understand what's the return on investment of working with a incident management platform like Fire Hydrant. The good news is we found it's pretty high. It's about 210% with the payback period of around about 5 months, if you were curious about that. And one of the things that we were happy to learn that kind of generally that was our understanding from talking to customers. Obviously, there's a high ROI, but to kind of get that economic analysis lined up with our kind of off-the-cuff understanding from customers was really great to hear. Now, I want to talk about this a little bit. So kind of help us frame out a little bit of the problems that we're seeing in on-call by talking generally about how this is tied into incident management. So as part of the research ESG conducted, they wanted to, in finding out how much we could help save companies, they had to kind of find out what these companies were actually paying on average for incidents to begin with. So to do that, they came up with a kind of composite organization based on a couple of factors. One, like a high-tech firms, we're talking IT, software, the kind of companies that you all probably work at. For our model, we had around kind of say 5,000 employees with an engineering team of around 1,500. Take an average fully loaded salary there of about $146,000 US. That includes salary, incentive, benefits, overhead, et cetera. And that included managing an average of about 50 incidents or 51 incidents per month across all severity types. This model company might be a little bit bigger than what your company looks like, but we think it generally is pretty indicative of what companies kind of up and down the scale might be facing. Obviously, kind of ratchet those numbers up and down accordingly. So don't worry if it doesn't look exactly like yours. In general, what they found these costs related to were a couple of different categories, a helpful framework for us in thinking about it. One, there's the explicit costs, right? So you've got labor hours. How much time did your team have to invest in this? How much salary and overhead did you spend on that? But importantly, too, what did that downtime cost you, right? So what did you lose in revenue, losing trust from customers, et cetera? The second category is opportunity costs, right? When you have your engineers working on things like incidents, they're necessarily not engaged in work that could be delivering value, clear value to customers, right? So there's the opportunity costs of things you could be building to expand your product offering, shoring up your product in other ways. And the final one's cultural drain, right? That responder burnout, turnover, all of that kind of leads to like ultimately time then you spend recruiting, time that you're spending not making progress because you're hiring and ramping new employees instead of working with your existing team. So as a general framework, I think it's a good indicator of how these costs are broken down. You can see more in our full ebook if you just search Fire Hydrant and Beyond Downtime. Now, one of the interesting things that really stuck out, though, to us were kind of how overlapping these are, right? They all end up kind of coming from the same root cause. So when we started thinking about that in terms of like alerting and on-call, we kind of saw that was just like the foundation. That was kind of like when you saw these downstream problems in incident response, they were really coming out of ultimately poor on-call culture. And the reason that we kind of got to that was this survey that I want to kind of talk about. We did a survey with about 250 folks last summer, and one of the most interesting was this kind of, these are the different reasons that folks have historically struggled with incidents at their org. You can see confusion around who to call, inconsistent handoffs. These are some of the leading areas that folks identified that they're seeing their team struggle with. But if you look at some of the other struggles, there are things that like feed out of that, right? So if you don't know who to escalate to, your assembly time is going to be lower or longer, which then has the downstream effect making your MTTR longer, right? So if you don't have a kind of clear source of truth, you don't know who to kind of escalate up to, that ends up with this really inconsistent response effort. You've got folks who are inconsistently trained, you've got inconsistent handoffs, inconsistent documentation, which kind of leads to a messy process overall. And a lot of that kind of ties back into that first piece that folks identified in this survey, which was responders just don't know who to call or how to escalate during an incident. It's just too hard. So that kind of led us to thinking about how actually should folks structure their on-call, or put another way, kind of like what effect does your on-call culture have on your broader engineering culture? So one, having a good, a well-structured on-call program can be the difference between a balanced workload and like an overpaged team, right? So if there's one team that's getting pulled into everything instead of an actual balanced out team-based approach, that can mean one person is getting overly paged and you're wearing someone down with fatigue, right? A good on-call system has really easy substitutions. It's easy to take one person and have them sit in and respond in place of another person during that shift. So there's swappability, right? That it's not one person's responsibility, but many people can step in. And the final piece is around that kind of like noise to signal ratio, right? Is like how many alerts are coming in and how many of them are meaningful. Are they fine-tuned to the kinds of things that you want your team to be responsible for? Or is it a default ignore and wait until the 75th one has come in and then maybe it's real that time, right? So being able to kind of have a better noise to signal ratio means that you're going to have a more meaningful response. And I'd love to talk about how we're thinking about this in regards to our alerting product we're working on, Signals. The first piece that we're thinking about there, as we took that on our learnings about on-call culture from not only the survey, but talking to many of you about how do you think about alerting, how do we evolve past kind of the current state of it. The first piece was about precision, right? That we think about alerting, or the way that alerting ought to be, as declarative, that you ought to be able to say, I've got a lot of data coming in, but I'm making a decision about these are the kinds of data events I want to turn into alerts. So giving you fine-grained control over that. And we do that through allowing you to write expressions and rules that turn any incoming monitoring signal or anything from any of your systems into an alert, if and only if you and your team have said, yes, this is the thing that I want to be alerting on. The second piece there is about ease of scheduling. Move on to the next one there, Mike. The team can easily create, so in Fire Hydrant, we've taken the approach of teams own their on-call schedules. They own their escalation policies. So it's very easy for teams and team members to easily adapt and update their own schedules. Managers can easily override a single shift. Users can easily say, hey, I need coverage for a full shift. I need coverage for just a slight bit of my shift. But the idea is it's super easy to kind of control. So think about that swappability. It's easy for any one person on the team to raise their hand and say, I need help. And just as easy for another person on the team to raise their hand and say, I got your back on this one. The final piece is really about kind of like reducing those noisy alerts, right? So making sure that like we're honing in on exactly those right alerts, whether that is through auto-resolving alerts, the alert rules that we kind of already talked about. A lot of this is about making sure that the alerts that do arrive at your team's mobile device in their Slack DMs, wherever that alert's going to arrive, that is the most meaningful possible thing. And they're able to take action on that. And that default reaction is not, oh, just another thing to ignore. So, all right. Thank you so much. I know we're kind of running through some of the stuff that we've been learning. Really super happy to share that with you. But I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Robert now for our roundtable discussion on how Joan and Alina and our guests here have improved the on-call life at their organizations.
Yeah, thanks, Joel. And it is such a privilege to have both Alina and Joan on this call. Right before this, we were all laughing and having a great time. So I'm genuinely very, very excited to have this conversation and just let them share all their experiences and colorful words to explain it all in between. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off and we're just going to ask them, how are they doing things? One of the things we commonly hear during these roundtables from visitors and people just tuning in is, what are other people doing? What's out there in the space? So to get started, we're actually going to ask the question, how do you even structure on-call at your organization? And I think to kick us off, let's go ahead with Joan from Udemy.
So we're an engineering organization with approximately 400 engineers, but we started very traditionally. We had only a couple of teams that were on call for the core infrastructure. And so they're still on call for the whole site. So you've got your database team and the site team, and they're the experts who've been on call for years, 10 years. They've been through everything. They know everything. They've got scars and trauma. And then as we've modernized and moved towards, the DevOps culture, you have all of these individual front-end teams and microservices, and they're all now on call for what they own. So a lot of them would be new to on-call, and they're just on call for their little bit. Whereas you've got then the more traditional teams that have the more holistic on-call for everything. So we've kind of got this different levels of experience, and it's been interesting. We've been learning a lot of things, and it's not been entirely smooth, but we're getting there. But that's where we are at the moment.
Awesome. And Alina, how are you structuring it right now?
So currently, one of the transitions we're in right now is moving to a truly global engineering workforce. And
oh, I think something muted you, like Ghost in the Machine.
Accidentally hit the spacebar. Sorry.
Oh.
So we're global now, and we have engineers across all time zones. And so every team manages their own local on-call rotation, and on-call for that team is essentially the central point of routing, whether it's bugs, escalations, emergency requests, incidents. They're really that point of triage for the team. And there's a very clear area of ownership for what the team owns. And the team's empowered to manage that on-call rotation as they see fit.
Nice. And is there kind of a central, guild of people that sets a template or something for this? Is there, or are people okay, we're going to create a new schedule, and they just kind of...
We have a set of patterns, and people tend to go with a standard, 1 week rotation. There's a lot of consistency in terms of handoff once a week, onboarding documentation. We do have a central incident command rotation. So we have a central rotation of leadership that provides coverage for all production incidents. And that provides consistency, so the team can focus on actually solving the technical issue, but we do have broad consistency across how we operate incidents, emergency situations.
And they're kind of the forcing function for taming down maybe some of the chaos that could come from teams owning their own schedules. Is that kind of the idea?
Yeah, and I think a key part of that as well as part of the postmortem process includes process in terms of, hey, were there gaps in how we responded as a team for on-call? Were we missing run books? Were we missing certain things that should be part of our status quo?
Yeah. No, I think that's a perfect place, and that's where you should be testing, process as well as also in the retro. Joan, how about you? Does your team have something similar? 400 engineers, that's a lot, right? There's a lot of, let's say, process drift that can come from that.
Oh yeah, and like Alina, we have a central incident manager rota, and it's over 2 different time zones. And it was kind of funny because we started off going, "This is so important. Only directors can do this." And then it was like, "Oh, they're very busy." And then it was like, "Only managers." It was like, They're actually useless. They're in too many meetings." And then now it's a case of we just try to widen the net and just have, yeah, it's a really important responsibility. But so we were trying to use it as the forcing function of, we're going to find the gaps here. We're going to try and say, hey, you don't have runbooks. Hey, you don't have this. However, if you have teams that their stuff doesn't break or doesn't break very noticeably, like there are, like I worked in my company for 7 years, and there are still teams that I meet and I go, hey, how come I don't know you? And they go, and we realize their stuff doesn't break in that way. And then I talk to them about on call, and it's like, wait, what are you doing? And they're like, wait, we need to do that. And you're like, oh, so it's still very easy to have major gaps in consistency. And it might not be anything like bad or causing problems, but it's still really easy for it to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like finding like a civilization that's like untouched by the rest of the country.
Yeah, and a case of, it's not negligence or anything. It's more just everyone's busy, everyone's doing their own thing, and it's not the top priority at that time. But it can happen pretty easily. So.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's really interesting.
a common one that can come up is like your organization's marketing website, because a lot of times your users may log in to your actual app through your marketing website.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like making sure you know, like when the marketing website goes down, like who's on call, what that runbook is to restore that, because to a user they might not realize, oh, the app's still up, but where I go to log in every day, I can't log in, and so for them, they can't use your app.
Right. Yeah. I've had that as an on-call engineer as well, where it was a different team. The marketing team owned the, www.com
Yes.
website, and that went down one day, and I got paged because that went down. And it was interesting, like who owns what.
Yes.
And it was
and somebody's like, wait, who is this? And you're like, that's WordPress. Who
Right.
has that? And it's some marketing person, and it's somebody not even technically in marketing, and they're like, oh, he does that, and you're like, and they're like, the site's down, and you're like, the site's not down. The site is not down.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's almost like in the past I've needed a break glass on call moment. Like there was when I used to work at an infrastructure provider, and all of a sudden forgot passwords stopped working. Actually, every email stopped working, and the reason is that the marketing team, I love marketing teams. I don't want to sound like I'm like always bashing them, especially because I have my a director of marketing on my call here. But we accidentally sent an email blast to like 3 million people using our SendGrid account, and they all marked it as spam because it didn't have an unsubscribe link. And all of a sudden SendGrid turned off our account and we couldn't send. Your instance has been provisioned, forgot passwords, all of it. And I got paged, and I was like, I don't know what to do. So what am I supposed to do right now? So having like the break glass in your on-call process and structure, I think is also very important. Let's move on to another topic that I think is important to maybe just let's level set and get it all out in the open here. But what is too noisy when it comes to alerts? And I know that there's it depends in here, right? Like it's all circumstantial, but so Alina, like take it on.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting question because alerts mean something different depending on who you talk to, right? So there are a lot of things that can route to an on-call engineer that may or may not require action. And you may lump those all together as alerts, but once you start drilling down, it's like, okay, like this thing is just an informational thing, and I want to just know that it happened, but I don't actually have to do anything. This thing that I got, I have to actually go in or restart this thing. This other thing lets me know that support is really pissed and I need to go deal with a thing with support. So I think sometimes the language trips us up and our tooling trips us up in terms of not truly being able to decipher those different workflows that we have. And so the other thing that this makes me think of is the distinction between during business hours, during when you would, a general let's say 9 to 5 during your local time work versus after. And I think the expectation oftentimes for on-call is you can get paged as many times as humanly possible during your working hours, which I'll set my issues with that aside, but that's like an acceptable thing. But then once you kind of log off for the day, that you really should only be getting pinged for emergencies. And so depending on your culture, I think some of those things contribute to what your acceptable level of alerts would look like.
Yeah, I think it can be a large part of like what is your culture too, like what is the tolerance of your team. Which, Joan, this is a perfect opportunity to ask your team's tolerance for and what is too noisy.
Well, because there's the thing of like when people ask questions about, you know, paging systems and monitoring systems, there's the question, the whole what's too noisy. Like, there's the thing of like, how often should your website be down? And it kind of comes back, and then you have the culture of on-call. And sometimes it comes back to, you know, how much should you suffer? And it's a case of, I don't think we should suffer. And then that seems to be a weird attitude that you have some people who are either new to on-call or they have the bias that on-call means you should suffer, or on-call is a task you give to people early in their career. The only reason, so I'm on call for incidents at the moment, incident coordinator. I'm not on call for the site itself, but that is only because I don't know enough about Kubernetes and I would make things worse. And the last time I tried to help something, I caused split brain on the database. So they don't let me in there anymore. But I think in terms of culture, I think sometimes we get lost in the details of, should we page for this? Should we page for that? And we forget the thing of, do we have enough staff to be on call for this? And has the business agreed with engineering of, this is something, all right, is this something that should get paged out of hours or even business hours? And if we're not staffed for it from an engineering point of view, sometimes I think we should just say, no, we're not going to be on call for this. And it isn't that we're pushing back. It's a case of, no, this is for humane and fair treatment of on-calls of staff. And it's a case of, we don't want to overwhelm staff. We don't want to burn them out. And that's not even when you add on call. You could have staff that are already close to being overwhelmed and burnt out, and then you want to add this on. Sorry, this turned into a rant. But yeah, I think I have the opinion that on call should not cause suffering. It should not be standard. It should not be built in. It should not be expected that you are suffering. And if you are in on, like, there's always going to be a bad week. There's always going to be the week from hell. You're going to have somebody that misunderstood the brief and thought, 10 tickets came in, I need to page you at 3 a.m. That's what we had this morning. We're like, 10 tickets. And it's just a misunderstanding. Like, you can have something that is a misunderstanding and you correct it. But generally, it's not supposed to hurt. That's it. And I think that has to be in the mindset of the company and engineering. I think that's more important to have than having the exact right tooling. But you need to have people who understand it and who've been through the bad system to be able to push that message up. So
right.
I'll stop ranting now. Yeah.
Well, I want to ask one thing about what you're saying though, is, you know, if suffering is not we want to avoid suffering, what are the leading indicators that like, maybe we're teetering, you know, we're getting close, that I can key into to prevent it?
Repeat disturbances out of work hours, and that action cannot be taken by the person who has been paged. So if somebody goes, I've just gotten paged again, you go, well, that's that noisy system that appears to be composed out of broken dreams and lies. And you're like, well, why is that paging me? The people who built the crappy system. So I am a big believer of, if something built by other people that is not being fixed by other people continuously pages you and you cannot deal with it, we're going to forward the pages to them instead. And if they go, well, I shouldn't be paged for this, and you go, well, then should anyone be paged for it? And then kill it. Yeah. But yeah, pages out of hours and pages that you cannot do anything, multiple pages out of hours, regular pages out of hours, and things that you cannot actually take any action on.
Yeah.
I think one indicator that I've observed is typically for a team. You have your on-call who's answering pages and then also providing triage support for the team channel. So whatever the channel is that other parts of the organization come in to get help from that team, the on-call is triaging, kind of first line of defense in that channel. So when the on-call feels like they can't answer pages and deal with systems and provide first level triage for inquiries in the channel, that means that person is feeling stressed because they can't help their coworkers with questions that are needed in the channel, and they have to choose between two very important things. And I've seen that cause a lot of stress for engineers. And then you're like, so then you have to choose, okay, do we just make people wait for a response? Or like there's no good answer in that situation. Or,
Mhm.
okay, do we pull someone off a project to then triage the support channel? And so I think that's where that tipping point, when it becomes more than a one-person job to do those two things, is where you can cause a lot of suffering.
Yeah, I think it's all of that. Yeah, I don't have any edits actually. Yeah, as someone has received pages for things that are inactionable by my team, or even myself, multiple times in a row, I mean, like at a certain point it becomes like cry wolf too, and my incentive to respond to it goes down and my anger goes up, and like then you're accidentally burning out people too that may ultimately leave your organization. I've worked with people that just got wrecked by on call, and they're like, this isn't the life I want. Like, this is personally impacting me. I'm not doing this anymore. So there's that toll, I would say, as well, that sometimes you pay. And what is kind of like a way of thinking about this ratio, right? We kind of started dabbling in it, right? What is too noisy, but what is something that's maybe a proper ratio of, I don't know, a mental model of how many alerts should an engineer be getting while they're on call? And because right now we hear from some companies, we've been building signals for a very long time now. We've been onboarding certain companies on it. And one of the questions we ask is, how many alerts do you send a month? And, you know, on the average, or maybe let's say the 90th percentile, is like 2.5 alerts per engineer on call a month. You know, in that, for me, when I was on call, that feels about right. Like I would maybe get paged 2.5 times a month. And then we found a couple of companies that was 115. And we were like, whoa, how is that even possible? So what is the ratio that, you know, how could we think about this?
I would think it comes down to what are your agents of change, because when I start doing on-call training for the whole site group in our company, I go, guys, I've got great things to tell you. And that is that most of what causes our incidents are self-inflicted. And they're looking at me kind of going, that's not good, Joan. I'm like, no, that's good, because self-inflicted means it's happening during work hours. Someone did this. That person then can be reached out to undo it. Whereas when it's caused by some mysterious health check that AWS implemented that did not work as expected, for a very non-specific example, that is out of your hands. You have no power. Or if you're one of the teams that is reliant on the health of Stripe, PayPal, and Adyen, that's a third party. Like, your agency and your peace of mind go right down. So it's your agents of change and where they are when they are doing things. That's going to determine how many pages you're going to get. But I do think it's really important for teams to have some idea of an industry norm, because I don't think people have that. So like Robert, you were saying, you and I were kind of thinking, you know, say you're on call in a month, a couple of times a month. Ideally, you should have a whole shift go by where you did not get paged at all. And you're like, when was that? Whereas somebody going, I can't even go and get a sandwich. I'm going to get paged twice while I'm getting a sandwich. That's no way to live. But then you have people that think that is the norm. And it's there. I wish there was an external party that could go, these are the norms. This is bad. This is dreadful. This is, please leave your job and go look somewhere else. Otherwise, you're going to get divorced and not have any sleep. I think there needs to be global numbers that people can look at.
Yeah, it'd be an interesting like collective project to do, right? Like everyone tell us what your average alerts are per month. And then, but you also have to include your engineering attrition rate as well, just to, for no real reason. We just want to know. Alina, what's your take here for your team?
I think it comes back to a little bit of what I started to talk about earlier in how you define alerts, because what can happen when you have a tool that effectively routes things to an engineer is people may start using it as like a workflow tool. And so what you might end up, and I've seen this use case and had these conversations where I'm like, okay, why are we doing it this way? And it's like, oh, well, that's how they keep track of the tasks they need to do that day. The on-call needs to do these tasks. And so I think at times, depending on your tooling, like having an on-call only work out of one tool to know like what they have to pay attention to and to be able to acknowledge them and snooze them, like it's a workflow. And so I think I've seen folks that have those higher alert numbers are using, they're not getting paged for like service down 100 times. It's like, hey, we're getting paged from support 25 times. We're getting paged from, GitHub to do a PR approval this many times. Like there's all different things that are routing to that team. I haven't seen really resistance or friction into the like, hey, if you're getting paged a bunch of times for like a system issue, that's a problem. It seems to be a universal understanding that that's a problem. But in turn, like our tooling just hasn't had the ability to decipher between, hey, instead of running this workflow through like a Jira ticket and a Jira program, we're just going to shoot it into our paging tool. Because then it just goes right to the on-call, and the on-call can just acknowledge it and know they need to go do it.
Yeah. Well, it brings up an interesting point of like, alert ratios, but what are we keying off of? Is it just anytime you get alerted? Because I've been paged in the past because I just knew about a system and they were like, we just need help understanding this thing.
Yeah.
And then there's systems where it's like, I pushed some shitty code and like I was an arsonist that day and like I'm my own enemy. So like, are those the same thing? Probably not.
Yeah.
Like those are different alerts. So I can see that as like a logical way to break it down and say you should only be getting, call it 2 alerts a month for a real system outage that you can actually
or like a
fix.
breaking change or like an outage.
Right.
Yeah, something like that.
Yeah. And 5 times a month max that we need you for some other reason. And then if we exceed that, that means that we have a siloed knowledge problem or something like that.
Exactly.
I've found that like it's a habit that I'm trying to break and I suck at it, that we should never page a person. We should always page a team. Even if I'm kind of going, I want to page Felipe. Felipe will be able to fix this. I know Felipe can fix this. But it's a case of, no, you page the owning team. And if the owning team are like, we don't know. I'm like, well, you should know because this is yours. And they're like, well, it's kind of his thing. And I go, well, for business continuity, everyone should know this. And they're going, of course, if you just page someone directly, you're like both victimizing them and hero culturing them, which is toxic. And even if the person's like, no, I don't mind. No, it's toxic for the whole organization because you're denying the knowledge and experience of other people on the team. Right. You've got siloed knowledge. That person's going to burn out. And other people turn to over-reliance. So I try to not page the individual. But it's really hard because you're like, this
really hard. When you know that person is a very, very yeah, right. It's like it kind of follows the phrase like if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. It's like it's the same concept, right? For being on call, you want your whole team to be able to be, a savior at some point. What I think it was the Phoenix Project, the book where the character in the book Brent is the end all be all, right? And Brent is a single point of failure eventually in the book. So you want to avoid those situations as much as you can.
Or you have to strategically go, I'm going to page this team. They own it. I know they're going to fail. But then we are going to expose some flaws in our processes. But it's not fun watching.
Yeah.
So.
And in that case, I've seen like the shadow on-call be put into play as well, where it's only during working hours. There's someone that is also simultaneously going to get paged because they're, being brought into that escalation path. You don't want to just like throw them out to the wolves and say good luck. It's like how they train staff at restaurants, right? What do? They follow them around. They follow them table to table. They hear how they take orders, how they solve problems with the orders. And like, that's kind of the solution that a lot of on-call teams I work with do, is they'll have a shadow on-call engineer.
But funnily enough, when you get down to that nice, high quality, humane on-call workload where you're only getting 2.5 pages a month, the shadowing thing doesn't work because they're like, I'm shadowing, but there's no bloody pages. And quite often I'm doing on-call training and they're like, Joan, okay, I'm wigging out. I'm so nervous about being on call. I'm like, why? There's no pages. They go, it's because there are no pages. So then what I've had to do is I go, okay, there were pages during when you guys were asleep. I'm going to fake them again. And I have to do like, just.
You have to pull the fire alarm, just see how they react.
You just have to do role play of like, and then this happened. What would you do in that scenario? Because it can be difficult to do training for staff on that one. And I think unlike the data you were collecting, quite often the trickiest part is how to find who you need. It's still a really big problem. And again, as we diversify and you've got more and more teams on call, and when you have lovely service catalogs in tools like Fire Hydrant and Datadog, and those tools exist and they're what you need to get who you have, but in the background you have to have all of your service, your names, your team names and your services all lined up very nicely in your own infrastructure. So even though the tooling might be there, you might not
threading the needle. I mean, it's you're 1 degree off, and in a complex system you are very off by the time you get down. I mean, Joan, why not just get back into the Kubernetes cluster if you're not having enough alerts? They just open the gates back up for you. And
I could do that.
Yeah, but the last comment I have on that is that what I've seen is if the culture does not have a visible way of recognizing proactive work, so the person who spent a day on a change run book that prevented a breaking change, like unless there's mechanisms and culture around recognizing that proactive work, then by nature, the on-call work is very visible if someone's jumping in and solving a problem in production. And so I think if you're incentivizing and recognizing proactive work, then you're going to see more of it.
We have an initiative at our company where when you're doing your OKRs for the quarter and scheduling your work, there's a thing of like, okay, this percentage of your work, this minimum percentage of your work should be operational excellence. And it's a case of this is where you do your bug fixes or your mitigation steps that came up as a result of a previous incident. Like, next time this would be better. This is where you make sure your monitors are good. This is where you have your run books. It is hard though, because I think even with that, it doesn't feel like the glory work, even when you're like, no, you've got to do this. And trying to say to people that like, some incidents, the time spent on it is dead time. You go, this was a waste of everyone's time. Like I will say most of our incidents there's some level of inevitability to it. And it's not so much that it is wasted time, but it was unplanned engineering time. It was engineering work that needed to be done, but was it planned? Oh no. Did this impact that thing that we really, really wanted to launch? Yes, it did quite a lot, because we spent 100 engineering hours dealing with this thing that by rights, we should have done a quarter ago. But
which can forge a lot of trust and relationship building. Like that's a silver lining, I feel like, in some of those incidents. I think everyone probably has a story of people that you worked on a really hard incident with that kind of bonded you for life.
Oh, seriously?
Oh, yeah.
Like especially after COVID and working from home, there have been times where we've had a quiet period and I haven't gotten to talk to a lot of my friends in engineering. And then there's some sort of terrible incident and we're all sitting in a Zoom for 4 hours. And I'm like, oh, I'm so glad I'm here with you guys. And they're like, it's 3 a.m., Joan. I mean, it's nice talking to you, but like you could just come out instead. So
Yeah, I second that entirely. I mean, I have old colleagues from DigitalOcean. There was a massive incident, and I won't go into the specifics of it, but global outage, and it's been 8 years since that incident, but we were like sitting on the floor in a conference room because there wasn't enough chairs for all of us to respond to this thing, and we got someone to go get us to go margaritas into the office. And, that was 8 years ago. And people that I meet and like still see at conferences, they'll ask me if they were in the room that day. They'll be like, "Was that the incident that started fire hydrant?" I was like, "You bet your ass it was." And it was a bonding moment, right? Like we bond through trauma, unfortunately. So what better way to make friends than being on call with them? So I think that we're going to turn it over to the floor now. I know there are a few folks here that may have questions. Mike.
Yeah, so I'll go into this question tab here. I can do that. So the first one is, has anyone implemented any kind of reward or recognition for on-call at your companies?
I've seen an operational excellence award program, and so it would be typically monthly has been my experience, in cadence with like a monthly operations review, rolling that out with like engineering leadership, and so people could nominate. So anyone across engineering support could nominate someone for an operational excellence award, and this would essentially be recognition for some of the hidden work, not necessarily the hero work, but the incentivizing the proactive behavior, the things that, the very quiet IC that diligently, worked on an effective rollout of something. And that seemed to, any reward program has its pitfalls, but I have seen that.
I like that idea. I'm going to propose that because you don't want the rewards to be purely something like this person for this slightly urgent thing worked all Saturday.
Exactly.
No, don't praise that.
Yeah.
And it's like, sometimes it's urgent. Sometimes it's like, seems like someone didn't plan things properly, but
and that can span across
things like that.
Like we had a cost anomaly or there was, someone dug in. So it could be like cost, production, reliability, just kind of anything in that operational excellence bucket.
I heard support mentioned, though, so I'll jump to this one. What role should or do support folks play in developing incident response automation?
That's a really interesting question. And this is interesting because this is something like we have an amazing support team because Udemy has a marketplace, so direct to consumer, and we also have a B2B platform. And our support staff, they have such in-depth knowledge of our customers, and they're like, oh, well, there's this. And like, I've worked with a lot of support teams, and I'm in awe constantly of our support team. They are so great. And so from an engineering point of view, I'm the interface between them and engineering a lot of the time. And it's a case of, how do we differentiate between something that's a bug or something that is a real problem or something that is a catastrophic outage? And weirdly enough, and this is again when you're talking to on-callers, catastrophic outage is the easiest one to categorize. There is no doubt, there's no gray area. It's the gray areas. They're the ones that we tend to end up getting slightly screwed on, or we look like asshats afterwards because they're like, why did this go on for 12 days? And it was like, well, we thought it wasn't impacting everybody. And it was. Or there's some miscommunication. So we are constantly trying to communicate with our support team around, okay, what's the threshold for emergency? Okay, what happens when you start with something and we've classified it as a baby problem? This is just a bug. And then it grows legs and it goes from 4 tickets to 40 tickets to 400 tickets. Like, is somebody watching that ramp up in tickets? What's the process? What do you do when it's out of hours for the support team and you've got the third party contracting company doing it, and they're brilliant as well? And but again, it's keeping those lines of communication open between all of them. And they're like, okay, well, what do we do when we're talking with America, when we're talking with Ireland, when we're talking with Turkey? So we do our best to have a constant feedback loop, and that we're helping them, they're helping us, everyone's helping the customers. And I am constantly in awe at how great they are, because I've worked in other places where no one was set up for success. Everybody thought everybody else was a jerk and they were lying and no one believed anyone. So, so yeah, like even just some stuff we had today, something got escalated. And I'm like, okay, I'm going to reach out to this person. We're going to discuss those thresholds. What can we do to help them? I'm pretty sure there's automation. Like that's literally what we're doing for the one that happened today. We're going to add a new scenario to fire hydrant. We're going to say, okay, this is something that can be categorized as this, that can go direct to that team. And we're going to remove that level. Like we had a team in the middle that was like, why are we here? There's nothing we can do. You paged me and there's nothing I can do about this. And I was like, okay, that's gone. So anything we can do in terms of automation process, is everyone on the same page? Just, you're all working together. Yeah, that's it. Sorry, that was very rambly. Sorry.
Oh, you're good. Alina, do you have a
Yeah, support is so critical. And I noticed Max in the chat had some comments as well, echoing what we're talking about here in terms of the communication side being so important, and having someone who's thinking about the communication side of it. And so in fire hydrant, support is one of our key use cases. And so we handle all of our communications through fire hydrant automation to our sales org, to our executive leadership, to our internal status page. We haven't made the jump yet to external status page automation, because everyone gets a little nervous about that. There's still a human that has to, push a button for that. But so that's where, previously support had a 65-point checklist in the wiki that the support engineer would get on call. They'd join the incident. They'd go through this very manual process, and all of that has been replaced with fire hydrant automagic, and it's been huge. And part of that, like echoing what you said, Joan, you have to have engineering and support has to be in agreement of okay, these class of issues we're going to handle kind of as a sub 3, or however you divvy it out in your org. And then you just have a working agreement. If it needs to be iterated on, you can iterate. And so it has made a massive difference. And we're piping all the data from fire hydrant out into other tools. And so support leadership has a dashboard of incident data, and they're have insight into what's going on. And because support for most SaaS orgs, the cost of support, how much it costs the business to run their support org, is a huge piece of the business. So support needs, how much time are we spending supporting engineering when they're breaking shit? And so being able to equip them with
Double
that
cost.
data can be very helpful.
Do you include your support people that were perhaps involved in the incident in a retrospective as well?
Yeah, we're not really strict about it, and so some folks are more engaged and excited about that than others, but we definitely extend the invite, encourage them to participate. There tends to be a lot of back and forth, creating talking points for customers and creating documentation. So I would consider them highly engaged from my experience, our T3 team.
For our retros, we invite all of engineering. We invite all of support as well. A subset of legal and a subset of our SOX compliance people, because they're like, this is interesting. But then they're all very busy. So the legal and SOX people go, I'll attend if I can, or flag me if there's a money one. And we're like, okay. And and then I think it's just to kind of let all parties know that yes, we are that, to confirm that we are doing our best, and we're also trying to have a unified thing of it's engineering, working with customer success, working with support, trying to hit all of the targets that every team has. Because I think, and even within engineering, half the time I'm trying to sort of say, by the way, this is important for these legal reasons. This is important because there could be an engineering thing that fails, and it's tiny. It's not even a failure. It's just a little bit slow, but it's something that's incredibly important to our customers. And I'm like, see, that will trigger 800 support tickets. So that is why that has this special action flow. And they're like, oh, I didn't know that. And because they could be working in a completely different section of the code. So retros from that point of view are a massive knowledge sharing opportunity for us across the different silos, not just within engineering, but also within engineering. My goal is that people come out of the retros going, huh, that's cool, so
yeah. And that's one of the use cases for custom fields in Fire Hydrant that we've used is Fire Hydrant is a source of truth that points out to any other documents that may have needed to be created, whether it's a Google Doc, whether it's a Jira, whatever that might look like. It's always linked from the Fire Hydrant incident.
I love how advanced you've gotten with our product and within your processes, and thank you for all the shout outs. Try to keep this as agnostic as possible.
Oh, I know how we solved that. Well, because that's what a lot of this, everything Joan is describing is like collaboration, right? And so that's great for the people that were like directly involved, but what happens when the director support logs in tomorrow and wants to self-service and get up to speed on what's going on? And so you have to have a way that people can self-service this information.
Yeah. On-call and incident management is a team sport, I would say. So I think we had time for one more question, Mike, and then we can more wrap up.
Yeah, we'll do one more. Maybe we can do like a lightning round on this one. I got a couple words to say at the end, and then we'll wrap it up. But last one here is, where is tooling innovation needed?
I would like there to be some sort of magic that points out who owns what, even when the team keeps changing their name. That's what kills me. Wow. So I don't know how to. I think magic or fairies. I don't know.
About you, Alina?
We'll get to work on that.
Okay, this is a tough one. I think so. From my perspective, the untapped area for incident response is the organizational piece, and when you have dynamic orgs that have lots of change, one example Joan just mentioned, how do you keep a stable backbone when things go wrong, just even though people are changing, teams are changing, systems are changing, and I think that's maybe there's and that's where the IDP, the developer portal market, is starting to get really hot. And so I think there's some kind of synergy there where your incident tooling, your IDP can somehow intuit or know based on whatever fancy AI thing that's coming to figure it out. And because there's no possible way an on-call engineer is going to remember who owns what. It's just not possible.
At a
so you have to
sufficient
have
scale, right?
Yeah, exactly. So you have to have, and it can't be, we're just going to hire this person who's going to manually keep this wiki page up to date. It just, we need like an intelligent,
what is that?
Something that intelligently like navigates the org Slack and the org documentation portals. And
I know I talked to somebody who said they just hooked everything up to Active Directory and it was beautiful and it worked. And I wanted to do that, but they wouldn't let me. And then they said, and then HR decided everything looked nicer capitalized and they broke it.
I'm familiar with that. Very familiar with that.
There's like a Dunbar's number for like services I understand, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like I had my core group of services. I'm like, I know my lay of the land here, but once I'm outside of that island, I have no idea who, what, or any of this is. So, I think it's a great kind of ending here. So, Mike, take us home here.
Let's do it. So everyone, thank you for attending. We hope you learned something you can take back to your orgs and apply. But right after this, immediately we'll be sending out a recording. And in that email, make sure to check that email out. There's a link in there to redeem a holiday gift from us here at Fire Hydrant. So you have the choice between some hot chocolate to keep you warm this winter, or you can maybe appease your sweet tooth a little bit for some dark chocolate and some peppermints. So thank you everyone for joining. And thank you to Alina and Joan for hopping on board with us. This was a lot of fun. But hope everyone has a happy holiday, and we'll see you in the new year.
Thanks so much.
Yeah. Bye.